Good morning, children. Welcome back. It's Thursday today, 7th May 2020. Now, today we'll be doing the next chapter of Street Child. Now, again, the resources that you will need for this lesson are a pen and a sheet of paper. So, I'm going to pause the slide so that you can get your resources and you're ready for your lesson. Learning intention: to write a letter using different features. Success criteria: I can understand parentheses. I can write a letter using different features. So write down your learning intention neatly in your books and write down today's date. Okay, now today we are going to read chapter 6. I'm going to read the initial part of the chapter as usual, and then you can read the remaining chapter very quietly in your minds. Chapter 6, Tip. At first, Jim couldn't tell one boy from another. They all had the same sallow thin faces and dark sunken eyes, and they all wore the same scratchy grey clothes and caps. They had their hair cropped and combed in exactly the same way, except for the boy who had spoken to him in the yard. His hair had a wild way of its own. He found himself following this boy round because he was the only one he could recognize, but it was a long time before he spoke to him. It was long time before Jim felt like talking to anyone. He was numb and wrapped up inside himself. But it was one morning in the schoolroom that Tip spoke to him and became the nearest thing to a friend that Jim could ever hope to have. The schoolroom where the boys spent every morning was a long dim room with candles set in every other desk. The little window had been painted over so that they couldn't look out. There was a fire at one end with sheets steaming round it. Old women sometimes wandered in to see to the sheets, putting wet ones up and taking down the dry ones to be packed off back to the big houses. These were the washermen, and this was their workhouse job, washing the clothes of the rich. The women would sit by the fire from time to time, mumbling to each other in low drones during the lessons, sometimes cackling out remarks to the boys or shouting out the wrong answers to the deaf old master's questions. Now read the remaining chapter quietly in your minds. Now, guided reading, chapter 6. How is the schoolroom different to your classroom? Now, when I read the chapter, it is in the initial part of the chapter. How is this schoolroom different to your classroom? Okay, so I read out that it was a dimly lit classroom, and what had happened to the windows. So write down those answers. You can go over the slides again and find the correct answer. Find and copy a phrase from the text to show that Mr. Barrick is a strict teacher. What does Tip do on page 55 that suggests he might become a good friend to Jim? What do the musical instruments symbolize for the boys? Now I'm going to again pause so that you can write the correct answers in your books. Now answers. It was a long dim room with candles set. Windows were painted so that the boys wouldn't look out. Okay, so now your classrooms are bright and airy, the windows are open, you can see through the windows. But in those days, the workhouse classrooms were very dimly lit and the windows were painted so that the children wouldn't be able to look out. Okay, that this happened during Victorian times. Okay, then what suggests that Mr. Barrick is a strict teacher? So he shook boys by the end of their jackets, shouted at them, and hit the boys with the knotted end of his robe if the boys got anything wrong. This is how teachers were during Victorian times. Okay, this was during the olden days. The next one, he helped Jim with his writing and took the blame on himself and accepted Mr. Barrick's beating. So tip, actually helped Jim with his writing, and when Jim was about to fall in trouble with Mr. Barrick, he blamed it on himself and he accepted Mr. Barrick's beating Tip. So this shows that Tip was a very good friend of Jim. Now when they were playing the musical instruments, it showed the way they were playing it, and when Jim and Tip were playing as well, it showed that they all were very sad at the workhouse. Now let's do a little bit of SPAG. Now yesterday children we did a little bit of parenthesis. Now you're going to do a task based on that. For each of these sentences add an extra information parenthesis in the spaces. Remember to mark the start and end of your parenthesis with brackets, commas or dashes. Vary your punctuation, don't use just one. Example, my brother never brushes his hair. Okay, so now the extra bit of information that I'm going to add is my brother, who thinks he's really cool, never brushes his hair, or my brother Jason never brushes his hair. My brother, the scruffiest boy in history, never brushes his hair. Okay, so the extra bit of information, either they've used commas or they've used dashes or they've used brackets. So same way you're going to complete these sentences adding extra information either using brackets, commas or dashes. I watched a horror film, something, and it really scared me. Dinosaurs, something, were a type of reptile. We are not allowed peanut butter. Then add the extra bit of information in school because there's a girl who's allergic to nuts. The bats, something, sleep in our attic during the day. And number 5, I lost my phone, something, when we went on the Thunder Roller ride. Okay, complete these sheets and email them to us so that we know what each child has done. Now task. Write a letter from Jim to his sisters describing his school in the workhouse. Remember to use your knowledge of parentheses. Now we've used all of the SPAG. Remember to use all of the knowledge of SPAG that you've recently done. Not only just parentheses, but adjectives, adverbs, whatever you've done before, use them in your letter writing. So imagine that you are Jim and you're writing a letter from Jim to his sisters Emily and Lizzie. How does he feel in his school and how is his school in the workhouse? Now the structure of a letter, you have done it before, but I'll just show you a few letters so that you know how do you write. Now this is an informal letter because he's writing it to his sisters. Remember that when you write it to your friends or your family members, then it's an informal letter. Okay, let me show you the structure or the format of an informal letter. Okay, so now this is the format of an informal letter. So the first thing that you have is the address, the date, then you have your greeting. So dear Alice. But here, because he's writing to Emily or Lizzie, you can say either dear Emily or dear Lizzie. Here you need to have the workhouse address. Okay, so you can make an imaginary address of where he lives in the workhouse. Then you have your initial introduction where you actually greet the person. So here it says, I hope this letter finds you in the best of spirits. Sorry, I have not been writing as regularly as I should. That's the initial part of the letter. Then you have your main idea about the letter where Jim describes to his sisters how his school is in the workhouse. So your main idea in the letter is that Jim is describing to his sisters how his life is in the workhouse. And then finally you conclude your letter, hope to hear from you soon. Kind regards, Mary. But now here, who has written the letter? Jim has written the letter. So you can say kind regards, Jim. Or you can say from your loving brother, Jim. Okay, so write your letter and email it to us on the Year 5 email address. Good luck with the writing and see you soon. Bye.